most inappropriate thing a professional, doctor, lawyer, contractor, electrician, etc., has ever said to you? Story 1. I was working a call where the guy was obviously dead, lividity, rigor, and had died sitting up on his couch. An old salty firefighter I was working with got tired of standing around, so he went and sat down on the couch next to the body. A cop came in to tell us that a family member had just arrived. My partner smacks the body on the shoulder and says, "Hey man, some people here to see you." I had to go hide behind the engine because I couldn't keep a straight face, and the last the person's family needed to see is a firefighter giggling around their dead loved one. Story 2. When I was in high school, I went to the library for movies. I saw a Grateful Dead movie, picked up, and was walking towards the checkout desk when the more senile librarian saw me and just said, "That's a blue movie. That's a blue movie." I was confused and walked on. When I got home, there was a contractor working on my parents' fireplace in the living room, which was right off the kitchen where my mom was. I walked in and started telling my mother about what happened, and we were both audibly trying to figure out what that librarian meant by blue movie. Contractor walks through the kitchen to go outside to get something from his truck, and without missing a beat said, "Blue means," as he walked by. My mother gasped. I laughed, and the contractor went about his business like nothing happened. Dude did a great job on the fireplace too, was a top-notch job all around. Story 3. In 7th grade, I was talking to my friend in class and mentioned my older sister, who was a dancer at the high school at the time. Upon hearing this, the assistant teacher for that class, also a dance coordinator or some bullshit, said, "Bitchburger is your sister?" And I said yes. She then looked down at her papers and said, "Geez, what happened to you?" with a lot of stanky tone. Bonus. The next year, some high schooler killed himself, and she pulled me and some other guy out of our classes and told us to seek help if we ever felt suicidal. We looked at each other confused and asked her why she pulled us out of class to say that. And she said, "Well, you two seem like the most likely to, and trailed off. Fuck you, Miss Fortenberry." Story 4. One of the Ambos who came to my house the morning my father died of a heart attack. She walked into his bedroom, huffed, and under her breath said, "There's no point in us being here." I said, "Oh, I'm sorry to have bothered you." Old mate with her kicked her out. Story 5. Funny in retrospect. Back in the 90s, it was considered good etiquette for current and future partners to 1. Be aware of one's HIV status, and 2. Get tested regularly. I had recently graduated from college and went to the health clinic for my yearly HIV test. The person testing me asked why I was getting tested. I told him I did it once a year. He said, "Why, are you dating a bunch of sailors?" Story 6. I had a neurologist who told me it was all in my head, that my migraines caused by a brain cyst was all in my head. My mom told him, of course it's all in her head. That's why we're here. Edit. Funny joke or not, it wasn't to him. He was trying to take me off of a medication that was clearly helping, thinking I was just faking it all, that no way a cyst would suddenly start having symptoms, to which the stress of high school and puberty causing to grow indeed did, making underlying symptoms worse. Story 7. In the ER, having a miscarriage. A nurse shook the jar of tissue in my face and said, "Hey, at least you get to get laid again," and tried high-fiving me. Story 8. I was seeing a specialist and had to get an ultrasound on my testicles. The guy was kind of brash the whole time but mostly silent. But when it was over, he stood up, said nothing to me, and walked towards the door, flipped the light, tossed a towel at me, and simply said, "Clean yourself up," and closed the door. I just sat there with my pants around my ankles and felt used. It was funny then, and funny now. Story 9. One time I had a UTI. It was bad, so I went to the doctor. It wasn't related to, and I didn't get it because of not cleaning up after. In fact, I was a virgin at the time. The RN looked at me right in the eyes and told me I was dirty. She didn't believe I hadn't had. People can get UTIs from other things. Story 10. Had a buddy tell me a story today about his dog. Apparently the dog had some kind of cancerous growth in its leg. The initial surgery to get the growth removed was $6K. So my buddy has the surgery done. Vets go in and remove the growth. During the surgery, vet discovers they can't remove the entire thing, so the dog needs additional treatment. They schedule my friend to come in for a follow-up APT after the surgery. My friend is told his dog needs chemotherapy, and that will cost an additional $12Ks. Friend is distraught over the news and the fact that he can't afford to pay $12K in medical expenses for his dog. Vet tells him, "Don't you work? How can't you afford this?" Adding insult to injury, he was charged $120 for the follow-up apt when he was told his dog would need $12K in chemo. Story 11. Time for my evil dentist rant. I have an implanted tooth. I went to an oral surgeon who installed a titanium rod into my skull. There is screw threading on the end. The pokes out of my gums. When it was initially healing, there was a small cap screwed on the exposed end, which would eventually be replaced by a porcelain tooth. When it came time to install my tooth, I went to my normal dentist who was supposed to just unscrew the cap and screw the tooth on. Well, 2 small complications occurred. 1. My bone and muscle hadn't fully healed around the rod. Shouldn't be a problem, so long as it's left mostly alone, it should heal just fine. Well, this dentist apparently has never heard righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. She starts cranking the end cap to the right. It won't budge, so Of course, she puts some real muscle on it and starts twisting with all her might. This whole time I can feel the whole screw moving inside my head, ripping flesh and pulling at splinters of bone. So I'm screaming, trying to push her away as I am feeling the worst pain of my life. She finally steps back and says, "It doesn't hurt that much. You need to calm down." Bitch, you do not get to tell a patient how much pain they are in. Story 12. A teacher at my elementary school once looked my mother straight in the eyes and told her my little brother was going to, at best, be a garbage man for the rest of his life because of his learning disability. That's a pretty fucked up thing to tell a parent when their kid is in 4th grade. Showed how much she knew, as said little brother was just accepted to University of Pittsburgh's medical program. Story 13. Not exactly unprofessional, but funny nonetheless. I was talking to an elderly doctor when I started cracking my fingers. He looks at them and goes, "Oh, that's cool. I used to do that. Now they just kind of do that themselves." Story 14. I went to my doc about 14 years ago when I had just started dating my wife. She had cats, my wife, not the doctor, and I was allergic. Both those past tense statements would be equally true in the present tense. Asked my doc what my options were for allergy management, since odds were good I'd be living with cats soon. Her response? My official medical advice is to date someone else. Story 15. I was asked to be an expert witness for a defense team. Within about 20 minutes of our first meeting, I had a junior solicitor tell me, "You've got nice. You should dye your hair blonde though." Jurors like blondes with nice big, never saw him again. Story 16. A male gynecologist I went to for a routine checkup told me to stop taking the antidepressants so I could start having babies. I was 29 and had been married for, 6 months? Yeah, he was probably right. Everyone knows. Unmedicated, severely depressed moms are the best moms. Story 17. My boss's boss took me out to lunch one day, and we were sitting there talking about some issues he's dealing with the accounting department. Our accounting department has a bunch of staff accountants and some controllers. We've heard that the controllers are mean to their staff accountants. They're underpaid, overworked, and forced into a lot of team participation things. My boss's boss starts addressing this like, "Do you know the concept of house N-words?" Except he actually said it. And I just froze because I never would have ever expected to hear him say anything like that. He then went on to explain the concept to me and correlated it to the controllers who have moved up from being staff accountants who now saw their staff accountants as lesser. The rest of lunch was very quiet and awkward, and I have never gone out to lunch with him again. Story 18. This is worse for me than it is for you. Male med student giving me, 17-year-old girl, a rectal exam. As if I wasn't humiliated enough you. I think he was trying to be funny, but it's hard to be humorous when you're bleeding internally. Story 19. A doctor we know social recently crashed a dinner I was at with my family, uninvited. He asked my college-age sister what she was studying, and when she told him she was going into food science, he told her, "I don't know what that is, but you could be a domestic goddess." Story 20. Went into a doctor after trying to top myself. I am a bit of an odd dude, and I do sometimes have what could be called an affect disconnect. So when I was telling the doctor about why I thought I wanted to end my life, I was pretty chipper. The doctor said, "I don't think your mannerisms are very appropriate, and I don't think you should have come in today." Bruh. Story 21. My neurologically deficient elderly father was sent to the wrong rehab. I was waiting at the intended one, which was 45 miles away. I panicked after he was hours late and asked the hospital case manager for help. She told me she had spent too much time on our case and hung up on me. Meanwhile, my dad was missing and unable to advocate for himself. Got it sorted, but I have never felt such rage and hope to never feel it again. Story 22. When I was a teenager, I was dealing with depression, and one day during a checkup with my doctor, I decided to confide in him about this and ask what they could do to help. He laughed at me and said, "You're not depressed. You're just a kid." After that, I asked my mom if we could switch doctors because I didn't want to have someone who would laugh at my face when I tried reaching out to them about something like that. Story 23. Freshman year of high school, I had terrible stomach pain for months. Eventually had an endoscopy and found 9 stomach lesions and ulcers. I had to sit out during certain PE activities while trying to let them heal. One of my PE teachers, shortly after my teachers were given the heads up by the nurses of my diagnosis, said out loud, "All right, everyone, run 4 laps. Oh, except you, my name, because I don't want to hear, 'Oh, my poor little tummy hurts.' Wah! Just walk and don't cry about it." In front of about 70 other kids. My mom was pretty pissed. The next time I saw her, she pulled me aside and said, "I didn't mean it like that, like being mean, you know that, right?" "Yes, you did." In front of everyone. Story 24. A few years back, I went to the OBGYN to get a checkup and new birth control prescription. I was 20 and heading back to college in a couple days, so I had to see a different doctor than normal, which is no big deal. In walks my doctor, a bald man in his 60s. We chat, he asked me about my holidays, and I mention I spent the new year with my boyfriend. He is giving my breast exam, and after checking my heartbeat, he goes, "Well, we can call your boyfriend." And I look at him quite confused. Turns out you're not heartless after all, and starts cackling. Didn't really know what to say there. Fast forward another year or so, I go back to the same practice, but my normal OB. A woman in like her 40s or 50s. Once again, she's giving me the breast exam and she goes, all of a sudden, you have magnificent breasts. You should tell your boyfriend he is very lucky. Like, okay, yay, for have doctor-approved titties, but can I get through a breast exam without weird commentary, pretty please? We ended up switching practices a couple years later. One of those moments that you didn't realize was weird when you were young. Story 25. I once had a PA insist on putting me on birth control and mentioned that I should remember to use condoms every time. Not so weird, up until he mentioned more than once, not to worry because I would become more selective with my sexual partners when I got older. So basically insinuating that not only did I have a lot of, but also that I wasn't too picky about who it was with. I was a 16-year-old Sunday school teaching virgin. Story 26. A few years ago, I had a bad throat infection. My usual doctor was out of town, so I went to a random one. As soon as I walked into the room, smiled and said hi, he looked at me, sighed, and told me that I better not be here complaining about feeling dizzy like every other dramatic teenage girl. Story 27. That was the first time I started to worry about my weight loss, and I was still in denial about my mental illness and the eating disorder that came with it. After exams and many questions, the doctor came to the conclusion that I just needed to eat more, which technically is right but was not helpful at the time. I told him that I couldn't, because when I do ate more than I was used to, I'd have this weird symptoms of shaking, sweating, my heart beating really fast. I couldn't breathe properly, which made me feel really scared. Basically, I was describing a panic attack, but I didn't know that at the time, and I thought it was the symptoms that scared me, and not the fear that triggered the symptoms. His answers to that, "You're in perfect health, kid. Stop being a drama queen." Story 28. When I asked my family practice doctor for some medicinal marijuana, she coyly looked at me and said, "I'm not sure there is anything I wouldn't do for you." Awkwardness ensued. Story 29. My ex-wife was 3 months pregnant when we discovered a massive amniotic fluid leakage that happened due to an undetected urinary infection that happened because the doctor forgot to put the correct tests on the requisition. After we found out the issue, we went to her office. She looked at the tests, looked at us and said, "Well, you should pray." My ex-wife bursted in tears. We left the office and were in a weird mix of desperation and numbness. Now, the completely opposite happened. When my father knew about the issue, he called his doctor and his doctor gave the home phone number of a doctor friend of his. We called him and immediately he told HS to calm down and explained how serious the situation was but that it was manageable. 5 months later, our first daughter was born, and all the women or the family started going to this doctor. Story 30. A dentist explained to me, a rational, intelligent 27-year-old at the time, that our teeth use pain signals to tell us something is wrong because they can't speak to us. Assistant for same dentist told me they were low on Novocaine. A doctor was giving me a breast examination, about 14 at the time, and tweaked my nipple as a finisher. And the way she did it was like weirdly playful and inappropriate, and it bothers me to this day. Story 31. Friend's story. Their son has hydroceles, but they want him to be circumcised. Doctor, urologist I think, comes in and looks him over. Doctor, with these hydroceles we can't circumcise him until they go away or are fixed. Him, that's disappointing. Doctor, well it isn't all bad, your son is huge. Him, huh? Doctor, your son has a huge penis, he's going to be popular when he's older. Him, well thanks for the consult, I guess we're done here. Edit. Corrected medical spelling. Story 32. I was in stirrups after delivering my first child. My very conservative mother was in the room with me. She asked the doctor if I needed stitches down there. He said, "Why? Does she plan on going out and fucking around real soon?" Story 33. On my first visit to the gynecologist as a teen, really uncomfortable and scared, had the female doc doing the examination say, "I had a very beautiful and pink cervix." Not as crazy as some of the others in the thread, but definitely weird as. Story 34. Went to the campus doctor because my depression had reached a terrible point and I wanted to die. And my medication was giving me mental side effects, including hypomania, which was terrifying. He ignored everything I said, then he said, totally unprompted, "Your acne is quite bad, isn't it?" and proceeded to try and shill me a $150 UV light machine invented by his friend. I don't blame him for my 2 suicide attempts that year, but I also don't not blame him. Story 35. My twins were preemie and had to stay in the NICU. When they first got put there, we were told they'd be on a feeding schedule of 1 bottle 2 days, 2 bottles 2 days, 4 bottles 2 days, and move up to 8 bottles per day as long as they were eating them with no issue. Day 3. When 2 bottles should have been introduced, the pamphlets in the room disappeared, showing their feeding schedule, and they were still on 1 bottle. They also had to see a speech pathologist, and she kept them on less bottles. We discussed it with the doctors and finally got them to do 5 bottles per baby. They did 1 to 5 but kept the other at 4. Next day, I called the hospital, as I had finally went home to spend some time with my pups and take a shower in my own home. The doctor got on the phone and told me they went back to 4 bottles. I asked why, and she told me, because I wasn't a medical professional, I did not know what was best. Turns out they were worried about the one breathing in milk and wanted to go slower. That's literally all I wanted to know. But no, she couldn't tell me that, so she got fired from my kids. Story 36. My 5th grade teacher. Nobody loves you. Nobody will ever love you. And yes, she did it in front of the whole class. Years later, one of my former classmates that I'm still friends with said she was probably drunk at the time. Story 37. I'm a nurse. I had a doctor walk out of a patient's room once and tell me he's read a study that says if 2 people's IQs are too far apart, they will not be able to understand each other. Therefore, he won't be able to educate his patient about their condition and medications as their IQ is too low, so I will have to do it. So many is still trying to find said study. Regularly ask same doctor about his IQ, whether he's interested in Mensa, what kinds of things does he do to keep the score up, etc. I know he regrets it, but I cannot let it go. Who says that? Story 38. I was 37 and a bit weeks pregnant with twins. I had preeclampsia and pitting edema, severe fluid retention, up to my ribs. I looked like a beached whale. I was over 24 hours into my induction when they decided they should put my epidural in. The anesthesiologist came and started trying. After making my leg tingly, he decided he couldn't get it. He needed a longer needle and probably a more senior tech to place it. The head of anesthetics arrives, and as she's putting this needle in my back, she tells me, "You shouldn't have gained so much weight. It's dangerous for the baby. You'll have to work harder to lose the weight." My husband, mother, and myself were all lost for words. Almost 3 years later, and my husband told this story at a dad's game night with our parents of multiples group, and the entire room went silent in horror. It was pretty funny to me because within 3 days of giving birth, I was down to pre-pregnancy weight. It was all babies and fluid. Story 39. Are you on birth control? I told the doc no, but I assured him I was good. I didn't want to tell him I was gay, so really didn't need it. He asked if I had ever heard of the method of using ibuprofen as birth control. Nope. How's that work? Easy. You take a single ibuprofen pill and hold it between your knees. Fuck that, man. Edit. The joke being that it's an effective method of birth control because it prevents women from opening their legs. He was gross. Story 40. My boss wanted to discuss my religious beliefs and practices during a business meeting. Also, in my early 20s, I was having a huge amount of. It started to burn when I peed. So I went in for a test. Everything came back negative, so the doctor's diagnosis was a gross overindulgence. Story 41. Not what they said, but more what they did. When I was in 9th grade, me and some buddies were messing around on our bikes under this bridge that crossed the lake. I decided to jump onto this small electrical-type building underneath. There was a higher ground, ditch then roof. I didn't quite make it and fell like 6 into the ditch. In doing so, a stick got me in the and cut my open. At the hospital, I get stitched up 6 or 7 stitches. I'm lying in the OR with holding a bandage on my waiting for it to stop fully bleeding. Pretty embarrassing for a 14-year-old kid. I guess word got around the hospital. In the next 30-40 minutes, 8-10 different nurses and doctors came to check out my stitched. Story 42. As a mid-teen, I had recurrent UTIs and ovarian cysts. On one of my many occasions visiting the emergency room, I had a pelvic exam, and the DR said, "Well, I've done an internal exam, and I have to say, I wasn't impressed. Sorry, my then 15-year-old pelvic area didn't get your Dr. Jimmy's going?" Story 43. It happened at the tail end of an appointment with my wife's rheumatologist after discussing treatment of yet another chronic disease she had been diagnosed with. When the doctor opened the door before walking out, he turned to me and said, "I bet if you knew half of what you were getting into, you never would have married her, huh?" Definitely the one time I've ever been at a complete loss for words. Needless to say, we never went back, and formal complaints to the hospital administration were made. Story 44. Went to the dentist for a checkup. Had a bit of decay on 2 teeth but nothing major. He was curious how it was only 2 teeth and the others were fine, and asked me straight up if it was from extended drug use. I told him no, and that I don't earn enough to fund a drug addiction and pay for a dentist. I had previously worked at McD's for years, so 80% of my diet was sugar. Story 45. I am a big girl, and I obviously am aware of it. I went to a new doctor, and she asked me if I had an active health issues. I thought she meant if I had diabetes or a current sinus infection or something, so I said no. She then said, "You don't think your weight is an active health issue?" Shots fired. Story 46. I was in for an appointment, and when it got into the mental health questions portion, I answered honestly that I felt I was dealing with some heavy depression indications. The feedback I got was, "Well, we all have ups and downs," before moving on with the appointment. Story 47. When our house got hit by lighting, we had to have a TV repairman come out and tell us our TV were broken. We had to for insurance purposes. He was in our house for like 10 minutes, said, "Yep, they were broken," and he couldn't fix them, but he would take them off our hands for us. That seemed shady as we said no and smashed them so he couldn't trash pick them. Oh, and it cost over $300 for him to make the house call. It was the biggest scam ever. Story 48. I'm a word processor at a law firm. One day, I was working on a bunch of contracts for individual doctors that all worked for the same medical group. The lawyer that had given me the contracts was talking to me about them and kept saying things like, "Not a lot of American names on there, are there?" And "I call this place the UNICEF Medical Group." I ignored it. Yay, office politics. And then asked him if he wanted me to include one doctor's full middle name. Everyone else's middle initial was listed, but this name had the full middle name listed. I wasn't sure if he wanted me to keep the formatting consistent or just list all the information we had. This doctor had a very common Arabic first name. The lawyer's response was, "Oh God, I don't know. If I put the wrong thing down, he's probably going to come and blow my house up or something." Edit. Thought of another one. I went to my first prenatal appointment and the doctor explained that she doesn't do ultrasounds in office because I'm not as good as the people I'm sending you to, so I might think that everything is fine. And then in like a month you come back and oops, dead baby. The number of times she used the phrase dead baby during this one appointment was just astounding. And then she spent 20 minutes talking about how she thinks her daughter might have a problem with alcohol. Story 49. Had some maintenance guy sent by my rental agent to do something at the apartment. He was a creep, and when he saw my cat's toys, he said, "Ooh, they look like toys." I made a complaint, but they still kept sending him. As a young female living alone, that really made me feel unsafe. Story 50. Best advice Michael ever gave me: don't be an idiot. Before I do anything, I ask myself, would an idiot do that? And if the answer is yes, I do not do that thing. Story 51. A former coworker told me that she had her first PAP when she joined the army at the age of 18. The young male doctor took one look and said, "Someone's not a natural blonde." She only went to female doctors after that. Story 52. Went to doctor over a large suspicious bulge in my abdomen. Was later determined, after CT scan, to be a hernia. When I talked about how unsightly it was, the PA, who incorrectly diagnosed it as a lipoma, benign tumor, shrugged and said, "Oh well, it's not like you were going to be an underwear model anyway. Thanks. I feel so much better now." Story 53. An electrician shook his 75% exposed sweaty cheeks in my face once. There was such force behind his booty clapping that some of the bun sweat splashed on my face. Story 54. I went to a dermatologist recently because I suspected I had a pretty low-level skin condition and it was finally time to do something about it. I see doctors regularly because I have several relatively minor health issues, one of them being that I'm overweight. At that point in my life, I had been working with a nutritionist for a year and a half and had completely changed the way I ate and lost about 20 pounds. I go in, and the resident takes a lot at my problem areas. She says she's pretty sure she knows what it is but wants to check with the doctor. She leaves. The doctor bursts in the door and the first thing out of her mouth is, "This is happening because you are overweight." I was stunned. She did not introduce herself. She did not ask my name. And she did not tell me what skin condition I had. The next thing out of her mouth was, "Actually, all of your health problems are because of your weight." She then spent 15 minutes telling me to lose weight, casually glancing through my medical history and telling me why being overweight is the cause of all my problems, and telling me to buy a fad diet book. At one point she said, "The key is healthy fats. You should be eating 3 avocados a day." After listening to her, I asked her if that stupid book was based on experimental evidence. She looked shocked and flipped to the back of the book, frantically looking at sources. Worst part of it was that a good 15 minutes into the conversation, she still had not told me what my skin condition was. I had to ask her what it was because she would not stop talking about how fat I was. Obesity is a risk factor for many health conditions. But I have had migraines since I was in middle school, and I only became overweight 3 years ago. So for her to say things like, "My migraines were caused by being overweight," was just insulting. TLDR. I went to see a dermatologist and she told me all of my health problems were because I was fat and forgot to tell me what my skin condition was. Story 55. My doctor told me, "It's okay that you hurt yourself on this new medicine. It's normal." I attempted suicide a week later. I'm not on that antidepressant anymore and I'm doing so much better. Story 56. Wasn't said directly to me but left a voicemail for a doctor one time, and he told one of the other nurses he didn't need a kid who sounds like he's strung out on dope to be leaving him messages. LOL. Funnily enough, we're actually on good terms now 7 years later. I was pissed about it before, but now I just look back and laugh about it. Story 57. I had one doctor look me up and down and act surprised when I said I was sexually active and wanted to go on the pill. I've also had 2 doctors suggest weight loss surgery, even though my BMI isn't high enough to qualify, and a gastric bypass would not address any of the issues causing me to be fat. I was also only 19 at the time. Story 58. I tried to kill myself during a bad episode of psychosis brought on by severe depression and trauma. When I was brought to a hospital and transferred by ambulance to a psych hospital, the EMT told me he wished he'd never gone into the field because he was supposed to help people who actually have medical emergencies, not a taxi service for people like me. I occasionally have anxiety attacks when I recall the way I was treated that night. Story 59. My uncle became a priest. I was not religious at the time. If I recall correctly, after he was ordained, we all lined up to congratulate him. As he shook our hands, he blessed us, to me saying, "I'll bless you anyway." Story 60. I was in the hospital a few years ago. I was about 13 or 14. I was given this liquid medicine orally, and since it tasted so bad, the nurses would put it into a syringe and squirt it in my mouth so I could swallow it quickly and not taste it so much. It was pretty well known for its taste. A nurse asked me what it tasted like. I said, "Melted down chocolate candy canes. I just take it and get it down as fast as I can. It's not so bad." She kind of laughed and said under her breath while giving it to me, "Yeah, you're gonna do well in the bars when you're older." Story 61. After I got my wisdom teeth removed, a large lump grew in the base of my jaw. They had to cut deep into the jawbone because mine were super impacted and sideways. I went back to the dental surgeon to have it checked out, but he waved me away and said, "It's nothing. You women always worry though, so I'll prescribe some more pain meds." A day later, and the lump burst, and my mouth was flooded with pus and blood. Went back to the dental surgeon, who still denied there being anything wrong but prescribed me an antibiotic to calm my hysteria. Story 62. Maybe it's psychosomatic, and you're trying to stop yourself from eating. You have been gaining weight after all. I woke up one day and I couldn't open my mouth at all. I could feel something swollen in my glands, but other than that, no pain or anything. So I went to the doctor. He said there was nothing wrong with me, and then proceeded to tell me that, as I had gone up about 10 pounds from my last visit, something like 3 years earlier, I went to the dentist instead. I had a salivary gland infection and couldn't move my mouth because of the swelling. That doctor. Story 63. After my dog was fixed, she had a severe reaction to the take-home pain medication. We took her in right away to the emergency vet. They told me it had nothing to do with the surgery, medication, etc., and it was something I exposed her to which was causing kidney failure, and I had no idea what I was talking about. A few weeks passed after she was at emergency for almost a week, and I took her into my primary vet, who okayed her for surgery, but I had the surgery done somewhere else. And she straight up told me that her reaction was caused by the pain meds and she did not have kidney failure. Luckily, the emergency clinic ended up getting shut down a few months later, and my primary vet is never concerned about my dog's health. We just have to be careful about certain meds. Story 64. A friend of mine had her doctor tell her when she was in high school she'd make a great trophy wife someday, after he was done giving her a physical. She's Korean and had never heard the phrase before, so she just brushed it off. When she found out what it meant later on, she was very angry. Story 65. My psychologist, who I only go to for Adderall, recently asked me if I was getting any, the back way, cause I'm gay. I thought it was hilarious. Story 66. I had tried to commit suicide. I was taken to a hospital I had once worked at. A male nurse practitioner came in when I was alone. He said he had to see down my hospital gown, bra, and panties. I told him I was no longer suicidal. His reply was that he had to make sure I had no weapons. Being all groggy from the pills I had consumed, I allowed it. As he walked out the door, he turned, looked me in the eye, smiled, and said, "I always thought you were cute," then left. That day I didn't think much of it, but as time wore on it would pop into my thoughts and I began to feel embarrassed by it. Very inappropriate. Story 67. My doctor, I would say former but still current because I can't get a new one because I would have to pay $800 to get my files and then be on a waiting list for probably years anyway. I cracked my foot on the sharp edge of my bed frame and cut it. Real bad, couldn't walk for weeks, had an x-ray. The tech told me it was broken. The doctor said I was fine, still had pain. About 4 months later, had been back to her several times. She said I was making it all up. It ended up being broken and I have a bone chunk in there. Had a few other issues she didn't believe me with, and those are luckily being treated, but that was a big physical one that was definitely real and can be proven. She doesn't believe in mental health issues. Treatment. Luckily, I found someone for that. Hopefully she does too before she kills a patient.